All right, folks, so this is the brand new Tacx Neo 3M, Garmin's newest high-end direct drive bike trainer, now with built-in motion. Now, this isn't just about combining their Neo motion plates with a Neo 2T. They've actually completely redesigned the 3M with quite a few changes on both the inside as well as the outside. So on the inside, there's new cooling and power components, which allows it to be more accurate over a broader range of power zones. And they've also improved the responsiveness both in sim mode as well as erg mode. And on the outside, they've integrated the Neo motion plates, which add forward and backward movement. They've also improved the side-to-side motion, and there's now a handle. So I've been riding the Neo 3M for quite a few weeks now, and I don't necessarily want to ruin it for the rest of this video, but this is a really good trainer, not only from the ride feel standpoint, but also the accuracy standpoint. And I've tested this with lots of different scenarios, with simulation rides on their Tacx training app, as well as Zwift, to erg mode rides on Trainer Road. And simply put, this is one of the highest performing direct drive bike trainers out there that you can get. Now, it's not a perfect trainer, just like anything else out there, and we'll certainly talk about some of those things in this video, but let's just go ahead and get into it and talk about some of the nitty-gritty details about this new 3M. So the Neo 3M is now going to be Garmin's highest end direct drive bike trainer, above the Neo 2T. And the Neo 2T is still sticking around, by the way. This just kind of adds some more features. So on the outside, it shares the same familiar design theme of the Neo 2T, and for me, I think it's a fantastic looking trainer with its kind of like Star Wars-like look to it. It has foldable legs, just like the Neo 2T, so you can stash it away when you're not using it, but they've also added that handle. And I know it may sound kind of silly that I'm talking about this handle, but that was one of my big complaints about the Neo trainers before this one. They didn't have a handle, and it was just kind of awkward to carry those things around. If you have a dedicated space for your trainer and don't move your trainer, the handle is probably not going to be that big a deal, but if you do happen to move your trainer, that handle is seriously nice to have. It's also a little bit bigger than the Neo 2T, and that's not just for the motion plates, but also this upper portion right here where they've added some new internal components with a more powerful power supply, a new heat resistor for increased heat dissipation, as well as a larger cooling fan. And all of this basically just makes the trainer more accurate and also improves the responsiveness. And in terms of accuracy, they actually have kept with the same plus or minus 1% accuracy as the Neo 2T, but it's supposed to be more accurate over a broader range of power zones, especially on the low end. The actual motor and magnets remain the same as the Neo 2T, where there's a configuration of 32 neodymium magnets which act as a virtual flywheel, but it's really more about the additional cooling and power components which leads to the increased accuracy and responsiveness. The max power on the 3M is going to be the same as the 2T, where it has a max power output of 2200 watts, which is a ton, by the way. But what they've been able to do with the 3M is achieve a lower minimum wattage. So this is where it's going to be more usable at lower power outputs. So think something like rest periods where you're not really weighting the pedals a lot. That's where power numbers can sometimes not line up. So it's going to be more accurate in those sort of scenarios. The maximum incline or gradient that it can replicate is going to be the same as the 2T, where it can replicate up to a 25% grade. But they claim that it has the ability to simulate grades better based on different body weights. And what I mean by this is that taller and heavier riders, well, it's going to take more power to simulate riding up a steep hill due to the gravity simulation aspect part of it. But the cooling components and the power components are supposed to help with that gradient simulation. Hope that makes sense. Honestly, for me, it rides about the same as the 2T, which is perfectly fine. And then just like the 2T, the 3M also has those unique LED lights on the bottom of the trainer that actually light up and change color based on your power output. So if you're just cruising along, it's more like a purple bluish color, and then when you really apply those watt bombs, it turns to red. And then another thing is that they've changed it so it just uses a simple power cord without a power brick like was previously used on the 2T. They basically house all that inside the trainer itself now. But on the bottom of the unit, this is the most obvious new thing about the 3M, and that's where they've integrated the Neo motion plates directly onto the bottom of the trainer, so it's not an additional accessory like on the Neo trainers before it. And along with that, there's also lockouts for the plates where you can simply turn these knobs on each side to lock it out when you don't want the motion and unlock it when you want it. And then when it comes to bike compatibility, so this works with a host of different bike configurations from quick release axle bikes to through axle bikes, and also does come with an 11-speed cassette, which is something new that didn't come on the 2T. And then if you happen to have a SRAM XD XDR body, a Shimano microspline, or a Campy 9-11, or their N3W body, those can be purchased aftermarket. And then when it comes to connectivity, it comes with basically everything that you would expect, like 2 Bluetooth connections as well as ANT Plus and ANT Plus FEC. And in addition to all that, there's also an optional smart network adapter, which enables a direct connection with your compatible indoor cycling training app, where you can connect it via Wi-Fi or a hardwire to your home network, which creates a more stable connection than what you can get over Bluetooth. And then all it does is just plugs into the bottom of your trainer next to the power cord, and it does have a nice long cable, and you'll just pair it with your Wi-Fi network via the Tacx training app. Now, in terms of if you actually need this accessory, well, if you're doing a lot of virtual racing, that's where this could come in handy to worry a little bit less about dropouts. Me, I don't usually have Bluetooth or ANT+ connectivity issues with any trainer, including the 3M. But if you do happen to live in an area with a lot of wireless interference, that's where this could come into play. Oh, and one last thing is that this accessory isn't going to be available right at launch. It's going to be available a little bit later on down the road. And in terms of some of the more unique features that the 3M has, and this is actually going to be the same as the 2T, so it has downhill simulation. So what happens here is that when you're going down a hill in your compatible cycling training app, it can actually drive the flywheel forward to kind of simulate the gravity that you experience in real life. And another thing that the 3M can do, and this is going to be the same as the 2T and even the Neo 2, is simulate different road surfaces. So think with something like Zwift when you're riding over some gravel, some dirt, some cobblestones, or some wooden bridges. All those magnets inside can actually simulate those different road surfaces to make it feel like you're riding over a rougher surface than just pavement. Think the spirit of gravel. It's just kind of something that does add to the indoor cycling experience, but don't worry, you can turn that off in most apps if you don't want it. And then another interesting feature that makes it from the 2T to the 3M is that you can actually ride the 3M without the power cord even plugged in, where it can actually power itself, where it can provide resistance, you can connect to apps, all that good stuff. The only feature that you can't get when it's not plugged into the wall is the downhill simulation. So in regards to the built-in motion with the 3M, they basically just integrated the Neo motion plates right into it. So this is the same 49 millimeters of forward and backward motion as before. The difference here though is that they now have built-in lockouts into the trainer. So on the back of the trainer, they have these two knobs that you just simply turn to engage or disengage the movement based on your preference. The 3M also does have a little bit of built-in side-to-side motion just like previous Neo trainers, but they have improved it. So fun fact, with previous Neo trainers, that built-in side-to-side motion was a happy little accident, kind of like a Bob Ross painting, where with the way they designed it, there was just naturally a little bit of flex there, but it also wasn't perfectly symmetrical, where I think there was a little bit more flex on the drive side than the non-drive side. But since they were redesigning the 3M, they went ahead and made that symmetrical now. And I think it's about 5 degrees on either side. But when it comes to the overall ride feel, well, there's actually a lot to talk about here involving how well it replicates the inertia and momentum that you would experience while riding outdoors, how well it responds to quick changes in power, that side-to-side motion, and of course the forward and backward motion. So from a pure ride feel perspective, when it relates to the virtual flywheel, it's basically just like the 2T, and it's a great ride feel where it replicates the inertia that you would experience outdoors really well, it maintains momentum well, and even more so with the downhill simulation feature where it can drive the flywheel forward on downhills. Oh, and then when it comes to hard sprints, so there's this kind of issue on the Neo 2, not the 2T, but the Neo 2 and the previous Neo trainers, where on hard sprints, when you really smash down hard, there's this kind of dead spot where it wouldn't actually kind of react to that sprint well. But they solved that with the 2T, and the 3M's the same, where there isn't that dead spot anymore. It responds instantly. The side-to-side motion on previous Neo trainers was great just because it made it feel like you weren't in a completely static position the entire time. And with the 3M, it's basically the same, but now it's symmetrical. And it is subtle, but after riding the 3M now, I can now feel with the 2T where it did move one direction a little bit more than the other. The forward and backward movement though, this is what I'd call kind of like an acquired taste, but personally, I've really come to like this kind of movement. It certainly did take me a bit to get used to it, but I found it just to be incredibly useful for reducing fatigue, especially on those longer rides where you not only have the side-to-side motion, but you also have the forward and backward motion. And then adding all that up just makes it feel like you're not riding on a 2x4 the entire time, and it does make it feel more natural. Now, the forward and backward movement works better with some types of riding, but not as much for others. So for simulation rides when you're just riding along, it's great. It just subtly moves and adds a little bit of motion. And even for harder sustained efforts, like let's say VO2 max efforts, it's really good. It doesn't really have all that much of an effect where it doesn't feel awkward at all. And this is even with seated sprints, it's really good. With sustained climbs when you're standing, there will be an initial moment where it may rock for a second when you shift your body weight, but after a second, I was able to kind of find this rhythm with the motion along with my pedal stroke. I actually kind of liked it. With standing sprints though, this is where the movement can feel a little bit more out of place, and I found that it mainly comes down to when you first get out of the saddle where your body weight shifts and the trainer can rock a bit more. Once you're in the sprint, you still can feel it, but it surprisingly didn't move all that much for me. I found it to be more that initial part when I shifted my body weight. But overall, I've come to like the forward and backward movement of trainers like this, where it really does help reduce fatigue, at least for me, for longer rides. And again, you can just go ahead and turn it off with those two knobs if you like. Garmin says that they did a lot of research into the possible energy loss with that added motion, but it really comes down to those hard sprints where you may see a little bit of loss. But overall, you really shouldn't see that much of an effect. And then one more thing I wanted to talk about before we get into power accuracy and erg mode feel and stuff like that is the setup experience. And this is actually where trainer companies have been making a lot of strides in recent years to make the setup process easier so you can get up and running quicker, or riding, I guess. So when you get the box, there's this kind of cardboard zipper type thing on the outside, which allows you to not have to lift the actual trainer box out of the box that it ships in. And if you've done this before, you know that it can be kind of hard with heavier boxes and trainers. So all you do here is just unzip it to remove the outer box. And then when you first open the actual trainer box, there's a QR code right on the top, which you can scan with your phone, which opens up the setup instructions, which are well done, but I'll just kind of quickly walk you through what needs to be done. So first, just go to remove everything from the top of the box. So these are going to be your manuals, your axle adapters, and your power cable. And then next up is to get the trainer out of the box, and you will need to lift it out at this point. The great thing, they have that added handle to the 3M. And then lastly, just go ahead and make sure to also grab the wheel block, which is at the bottom of the box. And then once all that's done, just go ahead and unfold the legs and then lift it up, and the legs just should automatically lock into place. So for the actual setup, you'll first want to get the correct axle adapters installed, and all the adapters do have labels on them, so they're easy to distinguish. And it actually comes with this little blue plastic tool to install the adapters, and they do also include a quick release for quick release bikes. So for me, with a quick release bike, all I needed to do was swap out a couple adapters, which just took a couple seconds, and then there's nothing that you need to do as long as you run an 11-speed cassette. Next up, you'll want to get the front riser block in place, and this is a specific riser block that allows the front wheel to move forward and backward, and this is a dual-sided riser block, so it accommodates quite a few different tire widths. Oh, and then last thing is to also make sure that the arrow is facing forward on the block. Next, just go ahead and mount your bike, get the wheel block situated so your front axle is aligned with the little lines on the block, and we're almost ready to ride. The last thing that you should do is pair it with the Tacx training app just by pressing the pairing button on the side here, and this is where you can adjust settings as well as check for firmware updates. And also make sure to enter your rider weight in here, which can actually play a factor in terms of how it simulates grades. But after that, you're ready to ride. And by the way, that pairing button was really only initially used to pair it with the Tacx training app. Like for any other software out there, the 3M just shows up as a Bluetooth or ANT Plus bike trainer, just like any other trainer. And then in terms of how loud it is, all right, here's a little sound check for you. Sound of clipping in. Sorry, that's probably a little loud for you. My drivetrain is pretty darn clean at this point, for once. So yeah, just talking at a normal volume here. I'm basically in the middle of my gear spread right now in the rear. Really, there's just kind of like this very light whir to it, light hum. Obviously, if you get on the more extremes of your gear range, you'll hear your drivetrain more because of the cross chain. That's just your drivetrain. Yeah, virtually silent. Start to increase speed. Again, a little more whirring as you increase speed. Even for the harder sprints, not bad at all. And in terms of power accuracy, the 3M has the same plus or minus 1% power accuracy claim as the 2T, but they say that it's supposed to be more accurate over a broader range of power zones, especially on that low end. And in terms of calibration, there's actually nothing that you need to do there, so it just automatically calibrates in the background. So let's go ahead and see how it did here, and I actually have a lot of comparisons with both the Fevero Asioma Duo pedals as well as the Garmin Rally XC pedals, which both have been proven to be very accurate. So first, let's go ahead and start out with some simulation rides on Zwift. So on this first ride here with the Rally XC pedals, well, you can see that it lines up basically perfectly both for the chart itself as well as for the average power. And then here's another ride where it's off by 1.18 watts versus the Rally XCs for the entire ride, but let's actually take a closer look to see what's going on here. So on the first half of the ride, again, quite close, but the average power on this half was about 3 watts off. Still perfectly within range though, considering the fact that pedals actually should be just ever so slightly higher than the power numbers that are being collected on the drivetrain, just considering that there's actually some drivetrain loss there. On the second half of the ride though, this part was much closer, where it was just about a watt or so off between the two, so really incredibly close here. Taking a look at some of those sprints, the peak power on the first sprint was super close to the pedals, and the ramp was about the same as well. And then on these last 4 sprints, again, crazy close here. Now, one area that you may see power accuracy get a little bit funky is right after a sprint where you actually let up quickly, but if we take a look at the end of each of these sprints, it's basically spot on. So those were the Rally XCs, which should line up probably perfectly with that trainer since Garmin makes most of them, but now let's go ahead and check out some rides with the Asiomas. So on this ride here, it's a little bit more off at 2.83 watts, but again, considering drivetrain loss, totally within spec. And if we take a look at these surges here, they're super nice, and the sprints look really good as well. Now on this ride, I also did want to test power at different cadences, which can sometimes vary on trainers, and I basically started out really low here, right around 45 RPM, increased to 70 RPM for a bit, then to 80, and then even faster right here. And again, no concerns, all good. So that's simulation mode, but now let's take a look at erg mode. So on this ride here with the Asiomas, there was about a 3.33 watt difference, which is still totally good. Now taking a closer look though, so here's where we can see that the 3M was basically spot on right here at these lower wattages. There was a bit more variance as we increased power though, but it was really only a handful of watts, like we can see here on this middle set of intervals. Moving on to the Rally XCs, again, this is where the 3M is closer expectedly and a lot closer at that. So taking a look at those same middle intervals here, there's basically a mirror image of each other. And then finally, here's another erg mode ride with the Rally XCs, and it looks extremely good. So for power accuracy, it certainly does deliver. And in this case, I would actually say that the Asiomas may actually be a little bit more accurate just because, again, I usually see a little bit higher power numbers out of a pedal versus something that's collected on the drivetrain. Now, accuracy is one thing, but there's also how it acts in erg mode. And what I mean by this is that with changes in resistance with different intervals, especially with big changes, it shouldn't be instant where it feels like you're hitting a brick wall. Conversely, it shouldn't also be too slow where you may be missing out on the power target, especially with shorter intervals. And this is another area where Garmin highlighted some big improvements, and I think they kind of nailed it. So like on that last workout that we saw, it's essentially doubling the wattage right here, and it's basically that nice balance where it applies power quickly and smoothly, but not being too quick. And it's basically right around that 4 to 5 second range, depending on how much change there is in wattage. With really hard intervals, I actually did overshoot these two right here, but these were just the first of the set where I was like, oh dear God, this is going to be hard. But overall, it does a stunning job here, as you can see from the rest of the sets. Another scenario I test with trainers is that if you go above or below your power target during an interval and how a trainer reacts. So what I mean by this is that if you go over your power target during an interval, the trainer should kind of back off a little bit so you can get back onto your prescribed wattage. And same thing goes in the other direction. If you go under your power target, it should apply a little bit more power so you can get back on track. And what I found is that it's pretty good for the most part, but if I were to go over like 10 or 15% or under 10 or 15%, it was a little bit slower to react than what I would like, where it was around 3 to 4 seconds. So I think that's one area that could be improved, but that is a little bit of an edge case there if you were to go that much over or under. So in terms of what Garmin promised with the 3M, it absolutely delivers both on ride feel, accuracy, responsiveness, all that good stuff. It's absolutely their best trainer yet. Now in terms of what the 3M doesn't have, so there's a few things here. So with the Wahoo Kicker Move, well, the lockout, you can actually engage it or disengage it when you're still sitting on the saddle. With the 3M, you actually do have to get off your bike to engage them or disengage them. Another thing that it doesn't have, and this could be just more of an at the moment sort of thing, is a race mode or a faster 10 Hertz transmission rate mode, which is going to be useful for virtual racing where there's basically going to be instant power reported to your indoor cycling training app. But what they said is that they're going to be evaluating if people want it and how they're actually going to implement it. Personally, I'd just say go at it. It also doesn't have Wi-Fi built in where you do have to purchase that $129 accessory. I can definitely understand the wired connection needing an adapter, but I would love to see Wi-Fi built in. But the last thing comes down to price. So the Neo 3M runs $2,000, which is $400 more than the Kicker Move, where the Kicker Move does have a more convenient lockout. It also does have built-in Wi-Fi, and it also does have a race mode, but hopefully the race mode is just a temporary thing. But the 3M, it does have road surface simulation. It also does have downhill simulation. You can use it without a power cord, and it does also have amazing erg mode performance. And lastly, I really like the look of the 3M. But I think this is going to be really interesting to see how this pans out with the 3M versus other trainers with similar types of movement. And don't worry, I will have some follow-up videos coming up soon on exactly that topic. Anyhow, if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor, just quickly hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for plenty of those videos that I was just talking about earlier. And in the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.